listening to The Mountain Spirit, a podcast of Christian Appalachian Project, where we share inspirational stories of faith, service, and compassion. I'm a firm believer that we're all connected by our shared humanity, and that finding that intersection sometimes just means having a conversation. Today we get to hear from Dave Harl, an award-winning producer and owner of Pinnacle Productions. The mission of Pinnacle Productions is to promote and tell the story of people making a difference and to inspire others to get involved. With over 20 years of experience, Dave and his team are visual storytellers that move you from inspiration to action. Hi, Dave. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Tina. Thank you very much for having me on.
Oh, we're so excited to talk to you today. So we're just going to get started. You've been a producer for over 15 years. How did you get started in that work? What led you into sort of marketing communications?
Well, it actually became a desire to storytell and to raise awareness about nonprofits making a difference, people making a difference, try to tell their stories and build as much support as possible. That was kind of my vision going into it. But really, I saw myself as someone who wanted to tell stories. I've been fortunate to travel to many places all over the world, and it's been just a very enjoyable experience.
So when you were a kid, did you know that this is what you wanted to do when you grew up?
Well, absolutely not. I had no idea I wanted to be a filmmaker until I actually started. Over the years, I've had some experience with telling stories, usually to large groups of people or to donors as a major gifts officer and as an executive director. And I always felt like people, it's one thing to tell a story and to try to give an understanding of, where a person comes from and what kinds of situations people are in. But until you actually see that story, until you actually see that produced, it's really hard to bring that understanding to people who can really make a difference. There are a lot of people in this world who do great things. And one thing I'd like to say is, I'm not a great person who does great things, but I know people who are great people and who've done great things. And I've been very blessed to tell their stories over the years.
Yeah, that I will dispute that you're not a great person, but okay, we'll have that on another episode, Dave Harl. Tell me about the farthest place that you've gone to capture a story, and what was the story you were trying to tell?
I would say this in New Delhi, India. The story I was trying to tell, let me back up a little bit. We adopted our child, Sadie, from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and we spent a couple of weeks there. That was an amazing experience. And as soon as we got back to the United States from that experience, I had to immediately leave to go to India to do this story. And so it was a little bit of change of culture there, but it was a story about a person by the name of Anathi Jebasing. And she was a woman who she would notice that she had young children coming to her house begging for food, and she started to teach them one by one out of her garage, out of New Delhi. She was a teacher in New Delhi at one of the universities. Pretty soon that grew into her actually going to some of the slum areas outside of New Delhi, teaching those children out of a public restroom in the slum areas of New Delhi. And when I went there, it was the opening of she had started this beautiful school. It was from the benefactors here. There were benefactors here in Kentucky that actually helped her build this school in the middle of New Delhi slum area to teach young people who would never have the opportunity to have an education to go through all of the primary grades. And it was just a really amazing story. I spent 2 weeks in New Delhi, and it was just so inspiring to get to know them, to get to know her, and just see these young people who just had such a promising career ahead of them. So that would be one that sticks in my mind.
Yeah, that's amazing. That just like hearing you talk about it, not visually seeing it, is just amazing. Besides that one, I know you've done lots and lots over these 15 years that really stuck with you personally And what captured your heart about that story? The one you just told was amazing. But is there another one that really just personally has stayed with you over the years?
I have to say, probably the work that I have done with CAP over the years has just about every story has been an amazing experience. For instance, having talked with and interviewed Father Biding on several occasions, I had the opportunity to put together a documentary of not only CAP's history, but also Father Biding's history. And that was a really good experience because it gave me the opportunity to really look at CAP's past and, come up with, find some of the footage that was shot years and years and years ago, back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. At this time, Father Biding, when we started putting that together, he was not doing too well physically. So I had an opportunity to take some of that footage and sit down with him at his house and play it and go through it and get some kind of context of what some of that history was. That was a really, really incredible experience to spend that time with him. Kind of goes back to some of the time we spent at CAP putting all of that together. So that was one experience. I'd say another experience outside of CAP would be, I had a couple of opportunities to go to the island of Iwo Jima in Japan. And this was the occasion of the battle. It was a memorial occasion where the United States and the Japanese get together for a ceremony to honor the peace and the memory of the soldiers that fell during that battle. There are very few World War II veterans left from that era. And I had the opportunity to interview several of them on Mount Suribachi. And just listening to their stories of heroism and what they went through to provide a safe passage for us to be able to take that island is incredible. But also the story of reconciliation with the Japanese. There was one instance in which an American soldier had brought a sewing kit to the island and made a presentation to the family of a Japanese soldier who fell at Iwo Jima, nearly 75 years ago. And it was such a heart-touching time because you think about the emotions behind that, and making that reconciliation really stuck with me, and it was just a really amazing experience.
That sounds amazing. Wow. So when you were preparing for a project like that, or any of your projects at Pinnacle with your team, what is that process like in the beginning? Like, how do you decide what do you want to get? How are you going to approach that story? What is that like?
That always starts with the client, whoever I'm working with. And one of the questions I ask is, tell me about some of your successes. Tell me about some of the people that you work with. It just depends on what kind of project that we're doing. But I always want to find, what are those stories that we can talk about, that talks about success, relationships. How do we want to present the story? So I always say that this goes back to remembering one thing. If there's one thing you can pull from a video that is memorable, then you've done your job. So that's, we go off that one thing, and then we find talking points that support that. That's how we get started. And then from there, we just plan our production, our filming, wherever that's going to take place.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Hello, friends of CAP. This year, CAP turns 60, and we couldn't be more excited. This marks 60 years of building hope, 60 years of transforming lives, 60 years of sharing Christ's love through service in Appalachia. And we plan to be here for many more years to come. In celebration of our anniversary, we have created a special website where you can view the CAP archives and experience our story throughout the first 60 years of CAP. Thank you for being part of our story. Visit us at wearecap.org. That is wearecap.org.
You could be a producer in any number of areas. Why nonprofit work?
You asked me, did you ever think you were ever going to be a producer or be in film? And that was never something that crossed my mind. It's always been, storytelling. And I just found that filmmaking and storytelling is just, that is in my mind the best way to tell stories is through film. And I've done a number of documentaries, and I really love the documentary style storytelling technique.
Yeah, that makes sense. You've also won a lot of awards for your work. What was your first, and what was special about that project to you?
Yeah, we have several Telly awards that we've won. The first award we won was the project I told you about in India. We won an award for that one. So I don't know if that was my first one, but it was definitely a memorable award. The last award we just won about 2 years ago was Marine Corps Heritage Foundation. So I actually went to the National Museum of the Marine Corps there in Washington, D.C., and accepted a award from Marine Corps Heritage Foundation for a documentary that I produced a few years ago called Generations of Honor. And this told stories about people all over the world, veterans, young people passing on that legacy of service. That project took me to France, Guam, Iwo Jima, several different sites. The idea was, telling these stories of people who went through amazing situations and how they pass that legacy of service on to our next generations.
Let's talk a little bit about how you prepare your subjects. When you're interviewing someone and the camera seems to be maybe intimidating them, how do you help them to feel at ease with the camera and to get at that story that you're trying to tell?
That's a really good question, because that's something we've had to become good at over the years. I usually start by telling somebody, it depends on how nervous they are, but I tell people that almost no one I've interviewed is experienced about being on camera. I've interviewed people, that are regularly on camera, that are on camera all the time. But most of the people that we do when we do interviews, we're just trying to get their story. We try to be as subtle as possible with cameras, and we also just spend some time talking. And it's not about having a list of questions in front of you and trying to make sure they answer each question exactly. No, to me, it's about having a conversation. It's about truth. It's about listening is the most important thing. Tina, if you want to make someone feel comfortable, they need to understand that you're listening to them. Because if you have a predetermined idea of what you want them to say, then that is not going to be a very comfortable situation. If you're put into an interview situation, it becomes a conversation, just like you and I are talking. I'm sure you have a list of questions, but this becomes a conversation, and we start talking and getting to know each other. I find that a few minutes into the interview, once you've done that, people tend to let their guard down. We use almost nothing from the first few minutes of our interview and almost everything from the last few minutes of our interviews.
Then people be at ease with you, and they forget about the camera. That's the goal. Just forget about the cameras there and just have that conversation.
Yeah, and it really is just about being respectful of other people and listening to them and making them feel, comfortable and being interested too. I think if you're not interested in what you do, that comes across.
Yeah, you gotta have that curiosity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So let's turn our focus a little bit, Dave, to Christian Appalachian Project. You've covered a lot of projects for CAP, natural disasters. You mentioned the 50-year anniversary, home repair projects. In those years, is there, outside of the 50-year anniversary, which you mentioned already, is there another shoot that stands out to you, and why is that?
The shoots that stand out to me most about CAP are the ones that we've done for housing and home repair. because I think this is the easiest way to see the impact that CAP makes in people's lives. CAP does so many great things as far as advocacy for families and being a part of a family's life. But when you see a home being transformed, it's not just the home being transformed. You're transforming people's lives. You're seeing relationships being made, wonderful relationships between our participants and the volunteers. Those are as important, in my opinion, as the new windows or the new doors or the new roof that a person's getting. Those kinds of stories. There was a woman a few years ago that she was a widow. Her husband had died. She was an older person, and she had talked to us about how for years she couldn't have her grandkids over because they were in danger of falling through the floor. The trailer was just in such bad shape. And she prayed and prayed and prayed for God to send her someone. And she said, God sent CAP. And to me, that just says it all right there. God sent CAP. And the people that were there helping her, it's just, they were so incredible. There was a nun in full habit with a hammer. You remember that?
Robin's house. I remember that video. I cried. I've seen it more than one time. I have cried more than one time when I've seen it. For me personally, of all the videos I've seen of yours, that is the best one. It comes up with a drone shot over them. I can visualize it over the Appalachian Mountains and going across her house. And then it's that line that she talks about her husband when he died. And it's, oh my gosh, it's just so moving. It's powerful. It's a personal tale. You can see it in her face. Like, she was like, I didn't know what I was going to do. And now here these folks come. And so just another one people should check out. We just called the Robbins video. You can look it up. It's just a powerful story of people helping people and what happens when we can come alongside people in their greatest hour of need when they don't know like what's going to happen next or where they could go. And you just captured that story. It's a beautiful piece of visual storytelling. I love it.
Well, one of the first stories I remember filming for CAP was, and this was an elderly visitation story. It was a woman who, she lived in Eastern Kentucky. It was the home was one that I think her husband had built many, many years ago, and it was just falling apart. She had an outhouse that she used, but she had a hard time getting to it because, she had many disabilities, but her attitude was just so happy. She just was very happy that CAP was coming to visit her. And when they started working on her house, you could just see the joy in her face when she no longer had to go to an outhouse. She could actually use the restroom in her own home. There's also a woman who was a single mom. She had a disabled child. She didn't have any resources. When I first met her, she was living in, it was either a hotel or an old, single room apartment. And the child just needed so much, therapy, and they needed all kinds of handicap accessible. And CAP just built them a home. And it just completely transformed their life, the child's life. The child ended up living and may still be alive today, but the child hadn't been expected to live very long. But that's another area where I'm like, wow, CAP really stepped in and helped this person.
Yeah. So how did you first hear about CAP and what made you decide to get involved?
Oh, that was, I hate to tell you, like mid-90s, because that really dates me. But,
You said I was in high school, Dave?
No, I was right out of college. And I had actually started working. I had a job. I was working for our family business. We owned an oil and gas pipeline company, and I had started doing marketing. And one day I just realized, well, what does success mean? And, was this a purposeful thing for me to do? And I don't know, my heart was just looking for something different. And I don't know how it happened. I think I picked up Father Biting book. It might have been Called to the Mountains. And I just read it. And I'm like, yeah, I want to try that. So I'm like, I'm going to go give 6 months of my life, and that'll be great. So I went out, and when I first came to Kentucky, first person I met was Kathy Klusner.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, 1994, and she put me over at the Mount Vernon house. We had a volunteer house at that time. But anyway, long story short, I ended up learning home repair from Lloyd Rice. Lloyd Rice taught me how to swing a hammer and build. And pretty soon I found myself starting a home repair program down in McCreary County with Ed Bowles. And that was, 95, I think. But anyway, after that, I was like, okay, 6 months turned it into a year. And then a year turned into 2 years. I just loved every minute of it. I loved the families that I had met and just the incredible relationships that were formed over the years. And then so I went back to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Jim Lynn, who was our director of housing at the time, called me up on the phone and he said, okay, so I've got this really low paying job with zero benefits and it's temporary. What do you think? And I'm like, that sounds awesome. So I came back and I started working in Rockcastle County. And then when that was over, I was like, well, I guess it's time for me to go home again. But the next thing that I was asked to do was to start this company. Well, it was kind of part of CAP, but it kind of wasn't. It was Father Biding's idea. It was called Appalachian Development Corporation. And the idea was, it was going to create economic development, you just utilize recycled materials and provide low-cost housing. That was the idea. So I was in charge of project management for that for there in Berea for a while. And that's when I met Josa, my wife, who worked at CAP. She was the accounting supervisor. Marvin House, my boss, and Mike Sanders, the president at the time, thought it would be funny if she would come and audit. Because at that time, I had spent a lot of CAP's money. Then I was sent out to Louisa, Kentucky, to build another 20 homes out in Louisa. That's when I met Father Biding. And I'd always been in awe of him. I'd met him one time before. But I had began managing all the contractors and materials. And meanwhile, Father Biding is building this camp called Boone's Landing. He got me in charge of helping him to build some cabins and such at the camp, which was actually a really nice camp. And I think it was going to be CAP's third camp. But for some reason, that didn't work out. I don't know. But I really did get to know Father at that point. And I was going over and he had me working on his street preaching equipment and he was recording things and I was helping him with that. And eventually Mike Sanders and Ben Pruitt thought it would be a good idea to have Father Biding read all of his books on tape. So we spent many, many, many nights in a small room recording his books on tape. So he liked to drink a lot of Diet Coke. So there was a lot of burping that went on. There were a lot of edits that I had to make during that process. But they ended up making several of those into tapes. And you, earlier this year, asked me about that. And I said, hey, did you know we have almost 12 of his books on tape already? And so we ended up finishing those this year, which was great. 25 years later.
And people can find them now if they go to the website, wearecap.org, our history site, and they can listen to those books in his own voice. It's amazing. It is like finding treasure, like the movie National Treasure is like finding treasure. You have all these things on a bookshelf in a big room that nobody really goes to. And wow, you found this really is a treasure. So thank you so much for bringing that project to life and knowing what it was and how we should value it and how we could use it present day. But can you tell me a story? We have been going, I love our conversation. Can you tell me a story that gives you hope when you think about Appalachia or your work in Appalachia?
Story that gives me hope. Well, I think about what CAP's doing now, and I think about how CAP has changed over the years. Of course, I saw a lot of good things happening at CAP when I was there. But I think the things that are going on now and the ways that CAP has changed, I see more focus on partnerships with families. I see more disaster relief efforts. We didn't have disaster relief efforts when I was at CAP. And I see that there is really a focus on building up not just the organization, but the people who work for the organization. And the reason why that gives me such hope is because I see an organization that really values the resource they have, which is people. And that's really what's made all the difference in the past. All the people that I've met at CAP, and especially the time I spent with Father Biding, it really starts with relationships. And I've seen that focus just really expand. So that gives me a lot of hope for the future.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Did you know that 1 in 5 children in Appalachia go to bed hungry? Many children look forward to their summer vacation from school, but there are girls and boys whose families depend on free school meals to stretch their paychecks. With your support, children and families suffering from hunger won't need to worry about where their meals come from. Your support will ensure lunches are delivered to hungry children throughout the region. Visit.
So I know that we hear a lot from people, some, who may never get to Eastern Kentucky. They may, they don't get a chance to see and experience what we've just been talking about. When you think about those folks and what stereotypes they may have, what's a stereotype in Appalachia that you've tried in your own work to overcome, or something that you'd like to see people really understand, that they might have a misconception about what it's like to be from or to live in Appalachia?
Joseph, my wife, she's from Jackson, Kentucky. And she will be the first one to tell you that those stereotypes are wrong. I think that anytime we stereotype somebody, we're fitting someone into a box that they don't necessarily belong into. Everyone's different. Kentucky stereotypes that portray people in a negative light are something that you and I'm sure, have tried to dispel over the years. And I love it when I see things that come out that are positive about Eastern Kentucky. I'm a part of this group called the Catholic Committee of Appalachia. We're actually having a conference next week. And one of the things that we try to do is that we try to encourage listening. So over the years, we've had these listening sessions, and those have resulted in letters that have come out on behalf of, our bishops, and also on behalf of the people of Appalachia, which I think have made a real difference, not only in Kentucky, but throughout the Appalachian states, in poverty, fairness, equality, racism, all kinds of things that we as a country, as a community, should be trying to promote. So that gives me a little bit of hope.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And speaking of hope, we're at our last question, Dave. Our time flew by. This has been so enlightening. I've learned so much about you. I've known you for all of my 8 years at CAP, and I was just like, wow, I didn't know that. So now I know. But speaking of hope, the mission statement of Christian Appalachian Project is building hope, transforming lives, and sharing Christ's love through service in Appalachia. Hope, transformation, love, and service. Which one of these resonates with you the most when you think of Appalachia?
Service. Because I think we all have something we can contribute. Whoever you are, you can contribute something to your community, to people, even if it's just building a relationship, just talking to someone, making them feel good. You can do something that is not selfish, that reaches out and touches another person and makes their life a little better.
Awesome. Dave, that's our time. Thank you so much for being on the show today. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too. Thanks, Sina.
Our guest today has been Dave Harl, an award-winning producer and owner of Pinnacle Productions. We hope you enjoyed the show and would tell your friends to check us out too. You can follow the work of Christian Appalachian Project on all social media channels. You can find the podcast at wearecap.org/podcast or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Be sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode.